A De Pere man convicted in 2018 of a federal crime is asking the court for relief. Ron Den Heuvel is now in his early 70s and living in Georgia. Wrote a letter to the federal court in Green Bay late last month asking the judge to address the legality of a 2015 search, as well as claims of withholding evidence and alleged conflicts of interest with prosecutors. This is a story we covered extensively back in 2018 when Den Heuvel pleaded guilty to one charge in a 14-count indictment as part of a plea agreement. Authorities say he defrauded investors of more than $9 million, including more than $1 million from the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation. Den Heuvel told investors he planned to start an eco-friendly business called Greenbox that would turn solid waste into energy. He was initially sentenced to 7.5 years in federal prison.